This is who you are now, Connor.
I don't want to be the hello guy.
You've already become him.
Hola.
He's going to come out of you when you least expect it.
It always comes out of me when
Job interviews.
Oh no.
Job interviews, asking people out on dates. It's who you are now.
Approaching some woman on the street. Hello. I think I'm Billy D. Williams or some shit. Oh. Hello. Welcome to the latest edition of Heavy Hands. We are here today to talk about upcoming fights mostly. In fact, I think we're going to save all of our recapping and post-fight analysis for a bonus ep. What we're going to be doing today is looking forward to sort of a random smattering of things from upcoming cards, both this coming weekend and after. First up, we will be discussing Demian Maia versus Ben Askren, a fascinating fight. And folks, if you were interested in grappling analysis, you came to the right place. Wait, no, that isn't the catchphrase of the show. So we're going to be doing our very best to tangle our way through that. Of course, there are more questions than just the intricacies of the ground games of the two competitors. There's the sort of overall picture of the fight. You know, what kind of fight is it going to be? There's always that tantalizing chance that you get two grapplers or wrestlers and they just end up having bad kickboxing with each other. So we'll be discussing all of that. In addition, we're going to look forward to Rory MacDonald's ill-fated, I think, rematch with Douglas Lima, set for next weekend's Bellator card. And that is that the final of this welterweight Grand Prix?
It is.
All right.
One of the rare examples of a MMA tournament which has gone almost entirely to plan.
Yeah. I don't think Rory MacDonald finding Jesus was part of the plan from the outset, but otherwise, it's all been pretty smooth sailing. And then we are going to look forward to a couple of fights, or maybe just one fight, from the upcoming card, UFC 244. Masvidal versus Diaz. And as much as that fight is like entertaining and great, and I'm not at all unhappy that it's happening, and wow, isn't it great that they made a parental advisory format for the poster, that main event is not really the best fight on the card. Like, not even close to me. It's a genuinely stacked card. And I think we're going to probably, if we only have time to talk about one, we're going to talk about one of the main card fixtures, Stephen Thompson versus Vicente Luque, which I think is quite a fascinating style matchup. So all of that to come. And then bonus recap on the Heavy Hands Patreon when all is said and done. Why don't we get into the main event of UFC Kallang, which is in Singapore, apparently. Demian Maia, Ben Askren. Phil, it's a tough one, right? It's tougher than maybe it should be, because as you already noted earlier, Demian Maia never beats wrestlers. Like, almost every loss on his record is just to a superior wrestler. So, what makes Ben Askren different, if anything, as an opponent?
Yeah, so I think that is one of the major, defining factors of, all Demian Maia's losses apart from pretty much Anderson Silva. And it's also something which, but I think those losses come into two separate categories, in that they are either the wrestlers who just completely shut him out of getting any grappling going, or, and this is the one which I think Askren, the camp that Askren falls into, the ones which wrestled and grappled with him and beat him anyway.
Yeah, because lately all we've seen are stronger wrestlers who just don't have any interest or need to actually play the ground game with Maia. Those are the Colby Covingtons, the Tyron Woodleys, the Kamaru Usmans. These people just shut him out completely. But you go back a little further, Jake Shields obviously comes to mind. You and I both just watched a little of his fight with Mark Munoz, which entailed a decent amount of top control from Mark Munoz. So you think Askren falls into the Jake Shields camp? I think I would tend to agree. But that's, I don't know, maybe that's the question we should start with, is like, what kind of fight do we get? Because for the life of me, I cannot envision Ben Askren winning the Usman Covington Woodley style of anti-grappling wrestling fight with Demian Maia, right? I don't think it's impossible that he has the ability to stop Maia's takedowns, should he want to stay on the feet, or to scramble free before Maia can secure position. But that doesn't seem to result in a kind of fight that Askren is good at, right? Askren, like Maia, is a really, really singularly specialized fighter in that if he's not wrestling and grappling you, he's really not doing that well. Unless you're
I would argue he's a much more specialized fighter than Demian Maia.
Yeah.
Demian Maia is a far better striker than Ben Askren
Because
is.
if they were to have a kickboxing bout, I would absolutely pick Demian Maia without a single doubt.
Yeah. And yeah, the other thing to note is that when we mentioned those, the two flavors of wrestler, the ones who have shut him out and the ones who have grappled with him, I guess, Rory MacDonald is not specifically a wrestler as in that, he doesn't have a collegiate background or anything, but, he's a strong wrestler and grappler. It's worth noting that a lot of those fights were pretty close.
Yes, they're always close. That's the thing. Even like Woodley Maia was not like an entirely one-sided fight.
Yeah. Shields, I think the Shields fight, a lot of people scored that for Maia. I think the Munoz fight, a lot of people scored it for Maia.
Mm-hmm.
These were not fights where he got shut out. But yeah, I think the idea that that Askren can run the big, powerful sprawl and brawler plan against Maia is a non-starter. He's going to have to grapple with him. He's going to have to win that way, and that thankfully opens up a much more interesting fight. Partially because I think we think Demian Maia could probably win. There is a question, does Demian Maia just run that fight against Ben Askren?
Right.
Does he try and run a sprawl and brawl game plan against Ben Askren? And I think, honestly, he probably could maybe do this, but I think in general, partially I think it would be something that would be difficult for him to stick to. I think a lot of his approach over the years has been built around pressure and moving into the clinch and so on. It would require him to mothball a whole bunch of skills he's picked up, and partially it's just a philosophical thing. He's clearly getting towards the end of his time in the UFC. He's innovated as much as he can within his style. He knows that they probably don't like him very much. He's not going to get another title shot anytime soon. I think that given what we know about Demian Maia, he is not going to want to waste his last fight striking.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I think K1 Maia is a thing of the past. I have trouble envisioning it. I'm also not entirely sure he could play that kind of game against Askren. Like, I don't know how good is Maia's takedown defense. It's rarely been a concern. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is the question. What happens when people want to actively grapple with Demian Maia? So the first thing that we noted when we were looking through footage is obviously that Maia has a strangely wrestler-centric bottom game. He is really not someone who tends to attack from his back in the classical jiu-jitsu sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's notable that the successful jiu-jitsu players that we've seen in MMA have sort of tended towards that. They've tended to be guys who prioritize top position.
Mm-hmm.
And Maia has a great half guard sweep, a great ability to kind of turn the corner and convert things into a whizzer and stand up, but he really doesn't attack much with much else from the floor.
No. Moment his back hits the mat, he's like, okay, am I in half guard? Check. Okay, are you trying to punch me? The moment you do, underhook, I'm on a single or I'm sweeping.
Yeah. And that sort of relatively bare bones approach has meant that he's actually spent reasonable amounts of time just being controlled on bottom.
By the really good grapplers only, though.
Yeah.
Because like the thing is like Chris Weidman couldn't keep him down. And I want to point this out. Maia has not been a static fighter. As you said, he's innovated within his style and expanded his style over the years and sort of changed his... I think he's sort of tailored his game to what he perceives as the meta of MMA grappling. And that Jake Shields fight, that's the last time that he has been taken down and spent time on his back and controlled. That was in 2013. And even before that, against, say, Chris Weidman was unable to keep Maia down. You know, Maia may end up in these bad situations against wrestlers where he's like fighting for a single, and whether that means getting up off his back or getting them to their backs, that's always a difficult proposition against, you know, the best qualified wrestlers he faces. But Chris Weidman, before Jake Shields, was not able to keep Maia down. You know, he got underhooked and Maia was able to stand up pretty much every time within about 30 seconds or less of being put in his back. So, like, is that a reflection of a Weidman just not pressing the right advantages, or is it a reflection of just Jake Shields being, you know, one of the most obnoxiously suffocating top control grapplers? Maybe that doesn't matter if we're talking about Ben Askren, because his style is maybe not too dissimilar from Shields' in that regard.
Yeah. I think both of those are... I think, yeah, that's the interesting factor, is that you would expect, like, size and power to play a big role there in, you know, the ability to keep him down, but Weidman obviously way bigger, way stronger than Jake Shields. And Askren definitely kind of closer to the Jake Shields type. Probably, you know, he's smaller than Jake Shields. So the question is, like, how do their two styles interact specifically? And there we get some interesting looks at how they're gonna interact, because Demian Maia tends to be that, you know, single leg into wrestling chain, whereas Askren does that thing where he just kind of comes forward with his head down and blunders into the double underhooks, and then tries to body lock and convert into either the double or a trip. And so if let's say Maia manages to get an entry on Askren, does Askren try to funk roll out of a single leg? Because if he does that, he really does risk giving his back up. Or does he just
has Maia ever seen a funk roll? Has he ever had someone just? I mean, you've got to be prepared for it, right? You got to be like, the moment this dude reaches between my legs and starts flopping around on the ground. I don't know. Can you funk roll out of a single? I guess you can.
Yeah. It's one of Askren's go-tos, I think.
Yeah.
So he just, you know, reaches back, grabs the opponent's leg and tries to roll through and get their back. So the other thing is that, like, these guys are going to have scouted each other very, very thoroughly. Like, we're talking, these are both grappling dorks. They love, you know, these are guys who deliver seminars. These are guys who teach.
Ben Askren watches BJJ Scout's videos of his own techniques. You know, yeah, these guys are both very intellectually fascinated by what they do.
Yep. So, you know, it's a fascinating thing of, like, do these guys have counters? Do they have counters to counters? Will Demian Maia go for a single leg? And then, you know, if Askren reaches back to grab his leg, does Demian Maia immediately step around and try and go for a back take? We've seen Ben Askren give his back up in grappling situations.
Probably not even just in the sense of the, not just with the funk rolls, but like Askren is a mat wrestler. Like, his primary, there was like, especially like, I think if you watch BJJ Scouts videos, like, there was a period earlier in Askren's MMA career where he was trying a very jiu-jitsu forward ground game. And he doesn't do that anymore. Like, he is going to give his back in a variety of positions in an attempt to create space so he can latch onto something and work around to your back. So, but if Askren gives his back to Demian Maia, like, I don't know if Maia can instantly secure a back mount on him.
I mean, it's also one of his special tricks. You know, it's one of those things one of those questions you can never really answer until you see it. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, Joseph Benavidez is amazing at scrambling out of adverse positions on the ground. Could he get out of what's his face? Jussier Formiga's back mount?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that until I saw it.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing here is like to me I'm really concerned with if either guy ends up on top. Like, I'm thinking more in probabilities here. If either guy ends up on top, who is more likely to turn that into fight winning momentum? So like, if Demian Maia gets Ben Askren's back, if he locks in that position, we have seen Demian Maia against capable, defensively aware wrestlers and grapplers stall out in those positions. You know, like Maia, he doesn't tend to submit everyone these days because like everyone knows what he's trying to do. And Maia is very incentivized to control a position. So like most of the time when he takes it back, it's like body triangle right away. He's locked on. He sees no reason to give up that position. He's going to be more or less predictably working for a rear naked choke as long as he's there. Askren, on the other hand, given an opportunity to gain a dominant position, he's a rider and a puncher. He's a lot more likely to actually be like racking up damage and having an effect on the next round with what he does in the previous round. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, God, I think I'm talking myself into picking Askren here, and I don't want to. I really don't want to. Especially because I already put a small bet on Demian Maia, Phil.
Well, that was a mistake.
Well, he was an underdog. But maybe it was. Maybe it was a mistake. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like, I just keep thinking of Maia's fight with Shields, and Maia just ends up in this difficult position where, like, if you play the right kind of wrestling top game against him, you force him into losing propositions over and over. Because when he's on his back, he's gonna work for that underhook. He's gonna work towards a single. He's gonna try to get back to his feet. If you don't just allow him, if your goal is not to, how do I want to say this? If your goal is not to like defend that single so much as it is to just keep him from creating any space with it, he's just stuck. You know, Maia would like that single to be completed, but also like that's not much of a priority over using it just to get back to his feet. But I don't see Askren giving him an opportunity to latch onto a single and work back to his feet. I see him doing what he did against Jake Shields, like latching onto a single and getting stuck.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Askren's ground game is good at, as you kind of alluded to, is that it's just about it's similar to similar to things like Cain Velasquez, where it's just taking small, tiny, infinitesimal wins over and over again.
Yes.
Whereas Maia's is generally a stepwise progression towards ending the fight. He's not going to give up I'm not saying he's not going to give up. He's going to give up positions, or he's going to, he's going to sell out looking for. But it is very much like A to B to C to win the fight.
Yeah. It's
whereas
jiu-jitsu.
one of Jake Shields' rounds was just Jake Shields just stayed in guard, moved to half guard, and just tapped away at Maia, and then Maia regained guard, and then Shields just kept tapping away at him and shifted to half guard, and that was a round. It was just a round that Jake Shields put in the bank of just shifting back and forth between half guard and full guard.
Perfectly happy to just keep allowing the same battle and mildly winning it over and over again.
Yeah, and so Askren's top game, should he be able to get it, and I think we probably think that he can, is very much about, taking small wins over and over again. It's just about taking the posts out.
Man.
And stripping the grips, and then mat rides and mat returns.
Here's the thing, though. Jake Shields is also like a better jiu-jitsu player, I think, than Ben Askren. You know what I mean? Jake Shields, like Chris Weidman, is more of a hybrid kind of fighter, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
His top game is a lot more focused on staying low and controlling the position. Askren is going to allow more of those battles. Like the battle that Jake Shields kept allowing, you know, in a strategic sense, they're similar. Jake Shields kept allowing the regard and then kept working back to half. Is Ben Askren going to be fighting a continually passing half guard battle with Demian Maia? Or is he more likely to allow Maia to create some space just so he can get to more of a riding position? I don't know, man.
I want to find some way of like putting his tendency of like stripping posts away and combining that with boom posted just to really upset you.
God damn
but I just can't find the perfect way to do it.
That was enough, really, is just to lay out what you were thinking. I mean, that hurt me. That was mission succeeded. God, I think I'm going to pick Ben Askren. I really thought I would be. I mean, I literally said the exact words to you before we started recording. I'm going to pick Demian Maia.
Also, it is 5 rounds, and Demian Maia's looked increasingly ragged.
That's the other thing, because I was coming in here fully prepared to say, even if I was coming here prepared to say, like, oh, I'm picking Demian Maia, here are the things I'm concerned about. And obviously, stamina, even in a fight where he's grappling with his opponent, you know, where he's a little calmer and able to control his pacing, even there, you have to be concerned about the, what is Maia now, 41 years old or something?
He's pretty old.
He's 41.
Yeah.
And stamina has been a notable issue for him for a while now. So, like, even in that, like I said, I was prepared to come in and say, even there I'd be worried, but it's fine, because what the fuck is Ben Askren going to do if he can't control the ground game? But maybe he just can. And, like, I that seems like a growing possibility to me. Very much so. That Ben Askren is... that Demian Maia just doesn't have the right game to work back to top position against someone who's not interested in securing or like working towards mount or something like that in the way that he is. He's just going to end up in those tiny losing battles over and over. Yeah, I'm picking Ben Askren. I'm blaming you for it, Phil. If Demian Maia wins, you're off the show. You know, like that's, what else can I do?
Yeah, well, I think, it's probably just going to be Maia goes for a takedown and Askren tries to funk roll out and just gets instantly RNC'd.
Please, because that is the other thing it's worth saying about Ben Askren. The man hasn't fought anybody, right? Like it does feel a little bit like evaluating all these wrestling skills in a bit of a vacuum. You know, I'm not saying there is generally more parity among like fighters outside the UFC and the major promotions than I think most people are willing to believe. We've seen that with, you know, people like Eddie Alvarez going and getting smoked by someone most UFC fans have never heard of. Like, so I don't want to say that Askren has fought absolute cans. He's fought a few pretty decent fighters that just don't have much recognition. But also, like, it feels too much like evaluating those skills in a vacuum. Especially when getting to the UFC, you just see him get utterly smoked twice.
I'm talking about destroyed Robbie Lawler.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah, I will say, I know it's not a likely outcome, but if Demian Maia could come out and then just instantly charge Ben Askren, flying knee him unconscious, and then mime falling asleep in the middle of the octagon, I think that would be the greatest thing I've ever seen in MMA.
He would never do that.
I know.
He's too
but
sweet.
It would be so good.
I would love if the Demian Maia version was not like going stiff and falling down, but just sort of curling up like a cat in the corner of the octagon. And you're like, oh, I think he's really napping. He's adorable. I love him. Yeah, that would be great. I'm going to go ahead and just hope desperately that that's what happens. Or that Askren has made some gross miscalculation and thinks he's going to do what the other recent wrestlers have done. That would be amazing. I would love to see Demian Maia kickboxing Ben Askren to pieces.
Just a 5-round kickboxing battle.
Yep. Between one guy who's not a good kickboxer, but is still definitely better than the other guy.
Uh-huh.
That would be great. Yeah, I guess I'm going with Askren, man. It's the stamina. It's the attrition. It's the fact that Maia's game is... It just doesn't seem compatible with a wrestler who doesn't really mind continually jostling for position as long as he gets to, stay on top. So,
yeah, I mean, another analogy which, not relevant to either of these guys, but Hermansen Jacare is a notable, this guy's an incredible BJJ ace, but, is primarily needed to be in top position to do it, and this guy is, has none of the credentials, but isn't even particularly athletic, but is just tireless and willing to go for it every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
so,
there's also
I'm a bit concerned.
There's the fact of Hermansen and I also think of Whitaker's fight against Jacare, that you can point to Askren's tendency to give his back as a tactical weakness against Maia, but also the fact that he's going to give his back immediately, knowing what he's trying to do with it. It's not the end of the world to give your back if you have a clear goal in mind, and you are working to improve your position, right? That's why wrestlers do it and still get away with it in MMA all the time. So there is kind of this overall sense of this jiu-jitsu guy has this incredible aura of you can't expose yourself to him on the ground, and then someone just goes in there and very confidently makes decisions and progresses in those ground positions. And it's like, oh, you can grapple with this extremely good grappler,
Yep.
Are you picking Ben Askren too?
I am.
Okay, good.
I'm not happy about it.
At least you'll go down with me.
So to speak.
Yeah. Don't snicker. All right. There was... we had some wayward comment about, I think it was Joanna and something with cream or something last week that was being mentioned in the YouTube comments. You're treading a thin line here, Phil. Okay. Well, that's segment one. It was an unmitigated disaster. When we come back, Rory MacDonald versus Douglas Lima 2. If you're a Rory MacDonald fan, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but that may also be an unmitigated disaster. We'll talk about that. And then we're going to get into Wonder Boy versus Luque and possibly a little more. But don't count on it, folks, after this.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back. Rory MacDonald versus Douglas Lima. Don't laugh.
Jesus.
Shut up. The main event of Bellator 232, which if you're looking for it is about 8/10 of the way down the page on Wikipedia, because this is how Bellator events are organized on Wikipedia. This is a rematch. Rory MacDonald, still the welterweight champion, despite the sort of weird draw that he had with John Fitch in a fight in which he looked really quite bad. I actually haven't seen his fight with Neiman Gracie. Have you seen that one?
I think so.
God, I've not done my due diligence.
But it's also just gone straight out of my head.
Yeah. Well, this is its own beast. We have seen Rory MacDonald fight Douglas Lima before. We saw it, in fact, 2 fights before the meeting with John Fitch, and it was a rough one for old Rory Mac. He had his leg kicked to absolute shreds, something that Douglas Lima has a penchant for doing to people, and just sort of saved himself entirely based on the fact that Douglas Lima's wrestling was really, really bad and couldn't stop the takedowns. So now we're back. Rory MacDonald, after that fight, I think the consensus seems worse off. The man has found Jesus, which is very strange for MMA's most beloved sociopathic murderer. And man, I don't know. I can't get the images of that John Fitch fight out of my head. I mean, granted, it was, allegedly an extremely juiced up John Fitch. I mean, that has to be said, right?
What?
This is like a 40-year-old John Fitch looking more ripped than ever before, looking very physically potent, shall we say. And I don't know, Rory MacDonald's one of those weird...
I think he'd just been working really hard, Connor.
That's right. All that Bitcoin laundering has given him so much free time to bulk up. So, there were weird factors going on, but Rory MacDonald looked off in ways that are not exactly easy to put your thumb on. Like, just more reluctant to pull the trigger. There was still, like, that killer instinct. There was a point where he put John Fitch down, I believe, with a head kick. He still went pretty hard for the finish and couldn't quite get it. But just in, like, he was fighting John Fitch, a guy you know exactly what he's going to do. And if you were, for example, to compare it to his performance years before against Demian Maia, a similarly predictable opponent who just wants to continually grab onto you as often as possible, Rory had a game plan and an approach to that fight that made sense. And against John Fitch, he just ended up doing a lot of waiting, seemed continually sort of surprised by the fact that Fitch was trying to wrestle him, and, landed some nice counters, but then much of the time didn't seem to know what he was doing. So this brings us to the rematch with Douglas Lima, a fight Rory MacDonald barely won before, and a Rory MacDonald who looks less sure of himself than ever before. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a big ask of the old people have the same fights every time heuristic, because... Yeah, on the one hand, it looked like Lima didn't have much of an answer for MacDonald's takedowns in their last fight. On the other hand, yeah, the margins of victory for Rory were very thin.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a fight where he seemed to know in that fight what he needed to do. And that he fought an extremely ugly fight, but he was consistently working and consistently active, and he pushed Lima back. He made sure Lima's back was to the fence at almost all times, no matter what it cost him. And the question is, can he do that again? And more to the point, we've seen Douglas Lima do this before. We've seen him have a fight where he lost against someone due to them picking up, opportunistic takedowns and controlling him on the mat. And then we've seen him completely turn it around in the rematch, because we've seen him do it to Andrei Kryshkov.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the most worrying thing to me, is that not only is Douglas Lima, despite like one really, still I think, I mean, granted, his wrestling looked improved against Kryshkov. It did show that, like, given the opportunity to focus on it, just being more aware of it, he was able to stop the same shots. But that's the worrying thing, is that Douglas Lima is not only like one of the best welterweights in the world, he's one of the best rematchers out there right now, I think. He does a really good job of adapting to what his opponent has already shown him. I don't know if is that true of Rory MacDonald? How many rematches has he ever had, actually? Curious.
None?
Yeah, right? Doesn't feel like... Oh, the Robbie Lawler.
Oh.
Not a successful adjustment. Although... Granted, he did make a lot of the right calls in that fight. and just got lulled.
Yeah.
So yeah. What do we think here? You think a similar approach from Rory? You think we're pushing Douglas Lima back into the fence with the jab? We're trying to keep him on the back foot so he can't fire off the low kicks. The thing is like, for all of his potency, Lima's still not that hard to push into the fence. He's kind of he's counter striker minded, and in some ways kind of seems comfortable with his back to the fence. He doesn't mind being put there. So I think it's very possible that avenue is still going to be there for Rory MacDonald if he should come out with an even more pressure-oriented game plan and focus on that. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's going to be there. I mean, both Douglas and Diego have actually, there's a similar dynamic going on between them than there is with, it's a similar one to the one we've seen from the Pitbull brothers, in that both of them have kind of gotten better at about the same clip. And Douglas is getting better from a much higher place than Diego is. So similarly to like Patricio has always been better than Patrici, they've both gotten better. Patricio is still better than Patrici.
Yeah.
But now like they're both beating higher level opponents than they ever could before. But yeah, I think that's pretty much just part of the style. I think Lima is willing to concede space because he's so confident in his power and so confident in his ability to hurt people should they come into him that he's just like, I can just give up as much room as needs, and you're going to come in on me, and then I'm just going to fuck you up.
Yeah, I mean, he's a genuinely, not just for his power, he's a genuinely great counterpuncher. Like, he's got fantastic timing. He has a diverse array of shots from which to select. So, like, if you're going to be vulnerable to the uppercut coming in, you're going to eat a hard uppercut coming in. And if you're going to throw a big overextended right hand like Koreshkov did in their first fight, I think, then, you know, you're going to eat a big left hook as you're falling over your lead leg.
I think that was their second one.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right. So Lima's genuinely very good at that. I think MacDonald maybe being a little more tentative with his entries and with his connecting the pieces of his game together is definitely some cause for concern there. The other thing is that there were times when Lima just got taken out with a shot, but I don't think it was like the larger problem. A lot of the time in the first fight with Rory, it wasn't the initial shot that got him off his feet, actually. Like, as the fight went on, he did adapt and start sprawling on those. It was his willingness to stay in the clinch and continue trying to work or punish MacDonald for that shot, and he ended up getting chain wrestled to the ground. Do you see that approach changing at all here?
Just based on his ability to shut down, like Koreshkov over time, yes. Yeah. Because he's also just so powerful.
Yeah.
That he doesn't have to make a huge amount of adjustments to be able to take people out in the clinch. And, you know, the story of the Koreshkov fights over time is really one of those ones where there's a single narrative running through three fights, similar to the Edgar versus Penn fights, is that it's just Koreshkov starts winning, starts controlling the fight, and then as time goes by, like, his success just goes out the window. And by the end of their fights, Douglas Lima is winning every round and ends up submitting Koreshkov.
Yeah.
And to that note, I would say that from Lima's perspective, it might actually not be the worst idea in the world to just hit takedowns on Rory Mac.
Why do you say that?
He had a round of uninterrupted and quite damaging top control on Rory. B, Rory completely disintegrated underneath Gegard Mousasi.
Yeah, true.
And C, it's just a way of stopping himself getting backed into the fence the whole time.
True. Yeah, it's not like he can't hit a shot of his own. That's interesting. Okay, so I don't want to be like too myopic here. Like my impression is I just don't trust Rory MacDonald to look good, to look on top of it. But, like, if he were to make some kind of adjustments to his approach, what would those look like? Like, to avoid, to improve on the very narrow win he got over Lima the first time around, what would you do? Come with a spare leg, maybe? That might be good.
What was that?
Bring a spare leg. You can kind of trade it out in the corner. That would be good.
Yep. I think he has to get his hands going more. And that's another reason why I'm slightly worried, is that he just has to. He's for a while. He's been almost dictated. He's been someone who needs to be a wrestler to win now.
Yeah,
he needs. We haven't really seen him successfully strike with someone. Really, that he's pretty much he definitely out damaged. Gracie and Fitch. Like,
yes.
It wasn't. I don't think those fights were robberies, anything like that. He did the damage in those fights, but those are not good strikers.
No,
like going from very nearly finishing Robbie Lawler to what he's been doing on the feet since then is. I mean, this is one of the reasons why you got to pick him. You got to pick Lima against him, because Rory has been so one note in his approach. He really has just been a wrestler. So for me, he has to let his hands go. He has to establish the jab.
And there's the additional difficulty of, like, if you're trying to establish your jab and you're already, as Rory MacDonald is, very heavily situated on that front leg, coming forward with punches, you're just going to get kicked.
Yep.
And, like, there's no doubt in my mind that Lima is going to be even more acutely aware of that vulnerability than he was in the first fight. Now he knows it's there. And I've never seen Rory MacDonald adapt to that. I don't think he has it in his toolbox. I've not really seen him check kicks. His stance has pretty much always been exactly the way it is. And there's just no getting around it. So he'd have to me, like, he'd have to submit Lima to win this fight. And I just don't see it happening.
Maybe he just wins exactly the same fight.
That could be great. I mean, never discount Rory MacDonald's toughness. But, I don't know. That John Fitch fight, I have a lot less confidence in Rory MacDonald's ability to soldier through in exactly the same way. And I have comparatively more confidence in Lima's ability to make some small adjustments, to maybe break away from those defended takedowns a little sooner, or to do what he did in that fourth round, that round of top control you were talking about, and just, like, reverse and sit on top as a response to the takedown. Maybe that's a better way of disincentivizing than trying to strike in the clinch and letting MacDonald get in on another leg. So I think I have a fairly confident pick for Douglas Lima, as I suspect many people will.
Yep, unfortunately, I got to join you.
All right. Well, that's the upcoming Bellator main event on, at least by Bellator standards, what passes for a pretty good card, I would say. Main event, MacDonald Lima, co-main, Daly Sadawad. Vitaly Minakov versus Javi Ayala. And weirdly, Robin van Roosmalen has a MMA fight on the prelims, and that is very strange, and it doesn't make me feel happy. I don't know. I don't feel like a world in which Robin van Roosmalen has been brought to the point where he feels he has to do MMA is a good one. That's just me. Okay, let's take one more break. When we come back, UFC 244 lies just under 2 weeks ahead of us. A stacked main card, a stacked preliminary card, even stacked Fight Pass prelims. The early prelims are looking equally delicious. We're going to get into at least one of those fights, likely just one of those fights, because it's a good one. But that is the welterweight battle between Stephen Thompson and Vicente Luque on the main card. That is coming up after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Stephen Thompson, the Wonder Boy himself, taking on Vicente Luque, the Dunder Boy. I don't know. I should have worked that out previously. I'm going to call this segment, Phil, a Stephen Thompson appreciation segment, dedicated in memoriam to Luca Bourdon, who, you know, I think there's been a bit of a wind change among us analytically minded fight fans. You know, thanks to the ill influence of Luca. Where now I think everyone has gone full circle on Stephen Thompson. He's now officially the worst striker in all of MMA. He's really bad. His style doesn't make any sense. He's a shitty kickboxer. He doesn't deserve any of the windfalls he's gotten throughout his career. I'm here to tell you that despite having two of the most atrocious fights of all time, Stephen Thompson is A, very, very good and well suited to beating a lot of MMA strikers, and B, generally very fun to watch too. And I will stand by that. Put him against someone not named Tyron Woodley, and the worst fight in his record is a complete domination of Rory MacDonald, which wasn't that bad. It just wasn't everything we wanted it to be. Otherwise, his career is full of fun fights, and I will stick up for Stephen Thompson.
You're a brave man, Connor.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, I think he is actually pretty fun to watch.
Yeah,
it has to be said. He was compared to being the next generation Machida, and he is actually much more fun to watch than Machida.
Okay. That's the show for this week. Thank you all so much for listening. Say your last goodbyes to Phil. No, it's fair. It's absolutely fair. Like, Stephen Thompson takes advantage of his opponent's inability to catch up with him a lot, with a wide variety of weapons. This is my crusade. Like, what's his worst fight other than the Tyron Woodley fights? Other than the Rory MacDonald one, which is not that bad. Is it picking Jorge Masvidal apart? Is it not quite finishing Patrick Cote only because Cote's chin is so good? Is it his incredibly valorous loss to Matt Brown in his second UFC bout? Come on. Guy rules.
Yeah, I'm not gonna fight it.
Phil,
he's actually pretty entertaining to watch. Although I will say that that second Tyron Woodley fight is probably my most hated fight ever.
Oh, there's the Darren Till fight too. I forgot about that.
Oh god, yeah, that was awful.
Okay, so give Stephen Thompson a very specific kind of opponent. He is capable of turning in some historically bad fights, but otherwise they're quite good. He's had 3 historically bad fights. Okay. All right. So matching up with Vicente Luque, I think a lot of people are going to be feeling Luque here as, like, you know, he's the coming man in this division. He's a super hard hitter, and Stephen Thompson has been dropped in like all of his recent performances. He just got knocked out by Anthony Pettis of all people. Not that Pettis is not a dangerous finisher, but you know, he's an old crusty lightweight. And I get that. You know, I think Luque's power alone is a concern. Luque is also a fairly slow-footed fighter who relies largely on a double forearm guard for his defense. And while a better cage cutter than, say, Jeremy Stevens, he's no Demetrius Johnson. He's not like incredibly good at keeping his opponent corralled into the fence and can be pushed back when his defense is taxed. And so what I'm saying is he really that different from like Patrick Cote or Johnny Hendricks when it comes to matching up with Stephen Thompson? Or perhaps a better way to put it is he a better pressure fighter than, say, Jorge Masvidal? Because I don't know that he is. And Masvidal pretty much got dominated by Stephen Thompson. It was a competitive fight, but he very clearly lost.
Yeah, I think that's one of those fights that weirdly has kind of been... There's been a consensus that we should just erase it from our memory.
Right.
Very impressive performance.
We should just remember the Masvidal wins over like Askren and Till.
Yeah, the goats.
Yeah. But yeah, this is going to be a tricky one, I think, because we've seen. I was watching the Anthony Pettis versus Wonderboy fight, and sure, Pettis won in a hilarious meme KO with the Superman punch off the cage, but he was really getting fucked up before that happened. And much of the fight before then was Pettis following Wonderboy around the cage behind a double forearm guard without cutting the cage off and just getting picked apart.
Yeah.
And the question is, whilst Luque has improved, is it in ways which are going to really work against Wonderboy Thompson? Because he hasn't shown... It feels like he's getting dialed in on a specific style, if I'm going to be honest. Like, he's really just become a boxer and a Thai clinch guy. I feel like he's really fallen in love with his power in ways which are not necessarily like going to help him in this way. Because if you asked Luca how you deal with his nemesis,
Luca, not Luque, right?
Yeah. Then he would say you throw 1-2 or feint 1-2 into leg kick as he runs away.
Mm-hmm.
And Luque's like diversity in his approaches has seemed to drain away somewhat. Although he did beat Perry up like to the head and body, but he really does headhunt a lot.
Mm-hmm. And he is a powerful low kicker, but it's true. I don't feel like we've seen much of that from him lately. Yeah.
And the other thing is obviously that Wonderboy is getting older. Yeah. He has an extremely athletically dependent style, and he's getting dropped in every single fight he has now.
Yeah.
And Luque is a marvelously dangerous finisher everywhere.
Yep. So that's the thing, is like basically the Anthony Pettis fight is the microcosm of this fight. Like you can predict that it's actually a really difficult style matchup for Vicente Luque, but that's not the same thing as predicting that he is going to lose. So like to me, a prediction of Luque absorbs a quite stunning amount of damage en route to a knockout victory, that seems like the best case you should be making for Vicente Luque. Because otherwise, I do think I just want to give credit to like Stephen Thompson as an outfighter, especially when you are, as I'm sure Luque will be, determined to get to him and lay hands on him. He's really sharp, great distance management. He has a really keen sense of not just the space between himself and his opponent, but the moves they are making to cut him off. He's not just a fighter who times his opponent's attacks, he times their footwork. And so when he sees you making, he's moving to his left, he sees you committing to that step that's going to cut him off. And as you're committing to that step, he's already changed direction and he's moving off to your right. Those little subtle moves are like incredibly frustrating, and I don't think Luque is even close to being immune to that. And there's also the fact that like Luque has absorbed a shitload of damage in his recent fights. I don't think it's impossible that Stephen Thompson drops him with a really nice straight counter as he's coming in. Because for all of Stephen Thompson's tendency to get dropped in most of his fights lately, he also knocks down like almost everyone he fights. Stephen Thompson is an accurate striker with great timing. So whether it's Jorge Masvidal or I don't know that he dropped Anthony Pettis, but whether it's Jorge Masvidal or Rory MacDonald or Johnny Hendricks or whomever, like even very durable fighters have been put down by Stephen Thompson. I might just pick him just because I'm a contrarian and it feels like everyone has decided that Stephen Thompson's no good. But I'm doing so fully expecting that he is going to be winning until he loses entirely.
Yeah, so I had a brief look at that Perry Luque fight, and I will say I've done Luque a bit of a disservice. He did actually attack Perry's leg a reasonable amount in that fight.
Cool, that's a good sign for him.
He is also, he still does have somewhat of a tendency to freeze up behind that double forearm guard, and if he does that against Wonderboy will just disappear.
Yeah,
he'll just be far away. Yeah, I think I'm also going to pick. Wonderboy. I think it's a strange fight, and I think that there's, much like Machida, I think people have figured out a way of fighting Wonderboy which is fairly effective, which is to just not give him too much to work with. I think that in the Till fight was not one actually an incredible display of skill or a particular chess match. It was just Till not leading at all.
Yeah, that was a meta conscious performance from Darren Till.
Yeah, so. It was similar to Machida's. A lot of people had those kind of fights with Machida once they figured it out. The Phil Davis and even like Dan Henderson had these incredibly low pace fights that were decided by a few strikes and were basically ended up a bit of a coin flip.
Yep.
But coin flips don't really favor anyone. It was Machida lost some of those and he won some of them, and I think that was very much what that Till fight looked like.
Yeah.
So I think that's there if Luque can, but again, that doesn't seem like a kind of fight that Vicente Luque is going to have.
It doesn't seem like Luque,
Yeah.
He's going to want to go in there and hit the guy. I just don't see him being able to resist, like, following Stephen Thompson around and trying to swing for him. So yeah, I think it would be very wise for Luque to channel that desire into a kick-focused game. I think absolutely do what Shogun Hua did to Lyoto Machida in their first fight. Keeping in mind, being a tremendously hard puncher, that you will always have an opportunity to do what Shogun did to Machida in their second fight, as Stephen Thompson is forced to engage and counter you for attacking his legs.
Absolutely. And he's a member of Team Evil, so we know that they teach decent fundamental kickboxing game plans. And if he comes out, with that approach trained into him, as say, Michael Johnson was for Nate Diaz, no reason to assume why he can't pull that off.
Yeah, Luque has certainly looked a little more capable of sticking to a strategy than Michael Johnson, say. So, yeah, there's an opportunity for him.
I think I'm going to pick Thompson as well. I think that Masvidal fight genuinely impressed me.
Yeah,
because I thought it was going to be much closer than it was. I picked Thompson to win it, but I was surprised at how one-sided it was.
Yeah, if you, like I suspect many other people have more or less forgotten that fight, go watch it. Not only is it a very impressive showing from Stephen Thompson, it's a good fight. It's fun. All right, both of us picking Stephen Thompson. I really thought you'd go Luque there, Phil. Now I'm sure we're wrong. Right? So if you're listening, do what you usually do. Bet on the guy we didn't pick. But either way, I think we've laid out a pretty clear picture of what the fight is likely to look like, what the dynamics are there, and that's what's really important. I tell myself every time I get a fight wrong. That does it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Phil, before we wrap up, do you have anything coming out this week?
So, a relatively packed schedule, I think. So I think we're doing a preview of Maia Askren. We're also doing one for Rory Mac versus Lima 2. And I think I'm going to write an article on Rory Mac and the general horrible brutality of leaving this sport behind and what it can do to you. Why? What does it look like when someone like Rory Mac, who was so incredibly invested in this sport, you know, all those stories of him like just staring at the wall for the entire time during weigh-ins, or during like when he was in the sauna, or just like obsessing over technique and all these other things, as someone who was 100% into MMA and just loved it more than anything, kind of what happens when someone drifts away from the sport like that, and what can it actually do to them? So yeah, a nice depressing like article to cap off our depressing discussions of that fight and our depressing pick of Askren over Maia.
And the perfect thing to punctuate our depressing lives.
Exactly.
Well, that sounds great. Actually, that sounds genuinely, after all that irony, I want to be clear. I'm sincere. That sounds great. I enjoy your pieces, Phil, and I wish you wrote them more often. And the same goes for me, because I've got a part 1 of my Whittaker Adesanya breakdowns out there. Where's part 2? Hadn't been written yet, so I'm going to try to get that.
Damn it.
I'm going to try to get that done this week. Part 1 was fixated on was Whittaker's game plan sensible, or was it as insane as everyone thought? And then like what went wrong. Part 2 is going to be about what could be done differently. So whether we're talking a rematch or just sort of picking apart the thing we already saw. So keep your eyes out for that, as well as Phil's piece. You'll find both of those on bloodyelbow.com. And and we're going to do a little bonus episode to recap last weekend's event, which was I've already literally forgotten what it was. Of course, it was Dominic Reyes versus Chris Weidman. There were quite a few interesting results on there. So we're going to get that on the Heavy Hands Patreon. And yeah, that's it for this week's show. Thank you all for listening. Find us on social media, Evil Greg Jackson. Evil Greg Jackson. That's right? It didn't sound right coming out of my mouth. At Boxing Bush, that's me, BUSCH. Both of those are on Twitter, of course. And until next week, we thank you guys for listening. And if you came here for the finer points of face punching and a few of the sort of smudgier points of grappling, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.